Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
Peace and blessings be upon you. All the European responses rejected negotiating with Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda, who presented a truce to the European states, which some described as absurd. The chief European negotiator Romano Prodi rejected the truce, saying that there cannot be negotiations under the threat of terrorism. For his part, the Spanish Foreign Minister Miguel Ángel Moratinos added that those of us who seek peace, democracy, and freedom do not need to listen or pay attention to bin Laden. Meanwhile, Britain refused any negotiations with Al-Qaeda, describing the Al-Qaeda leader's offer as ironic and deceptive because it aims to divide Europe and the United States. The German government said that it does not deal with criminals like Osama bin Laden. The Italian Foreign Minister, Frank Frattini, announced that negotiations with the Al-Qaeda and its leaders is unthinkable and not an option. The newly elected Spanish Prime Minister, José Luis Zapatero, renewed his desire to withdraw forces from Iraq. He said he will not deploy forces abroad without UN approval. The socialist leader, in front of Parliament in the first day of debate over their agenda, confirmed that Spain will keep its commitments relating to defending peace and security.
I guarantee you that my government is committed to stability and democracy and reconstruction in Iraq. Be assured of my commitment to withdraw Spanish forces from Iraq if the United Nations does not take over responsibility on June 30th. At this moment, Iraqis want freedom and are prepared to carry out free and democratic elections. My position on the presence of Spanish troops in Iraq is well known, as is my argument and reasoning. Day after day, we see a continued deterioration of the situation in Iraq, which takes it further and further away from an environment of peace and stability.
More than 100 people demonstrated against the war in Iraq in front of the U.S. Embassy in South Korea, protesting the visit to Seoul by U.S. Vice President Dick Cheney, which comes as demonstrators place pressure on the South Korean government in opposition to deploying South Korean forces to Iraq. Meanwhile, supporters of U.S. policies gathered near a military base near the capital of Seoul to welcome the U.S. Vice President and demanded the quick deployment of 3,600 South Korean soldiers to Iraq and that Pyongyang drop its nuclear program. Dick Cheney arrives in Seoul at the same time as the country's parliamentary elections were being held. There is wide-scale anticipation for these elections because it will determine the future fate of President Roh Moo-hyun amidst his impeachment. The initial results of the elections show a victory for the Uri party with the majority of seats in the parliament out of 299 seats. The High Commissioner of Refugee Negotiations, Ruud Lubbers, visited Afghanistan for a second time to exert state efforts to administer the return of refugees to Afghanistan. Ruud Lubbers, who in the same week visited Iran and Pakistan, confirmed that there are international preparations to continue support of the responsibility of returning Afghan refugees to their country after the war forced them to leave. He confirmed the need to support a program to allocate the support designated to them. Lubbers visited some of the refugee camps, where he oversaw the welcoming and registration of some of the refugees. The Palestinian National Authority stated that any arrangements with Israel must occur at the negotiating table. During an emergency meeting in Ramallah, the Palestinian Authority stated that the U.S. promises to Israel are a violation of international law. Their statement is in response to U.S. President George Bush's support of Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. Meanwhile, Israeli media outlets reported that Tel Aviv officials informed officials in Washington that the Israeli withdrawal from Palestinian land, which is part of the unilateral disengagement plan, will occur by summer of 2005.
U.S. President George Bush's statements, which followed his meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Sharon, ignited the anger of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip on all levels, including the political and popular, in addition to the resistance factions. His statement was completely refuted since it violates all international decrees and resolutions regarding the Palestinian struggle. Not only that, but it also contributes to the continued Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories and the confiscation of additional land.
This destroys the peace process and replaces the roadmap with an Israeli plan, which aims at expansion and occupation. Also, it serves Sharon's reservations on the roadmap, particularly on the issue of Palestinian refugees.
The Hamas movement considers the statements made by the U.S. president as a slap in the face to all those who are counting on the American position, or even the position of Europe, which has been silenced. Hamas is urging everyone, including the Palestinian Authority, to support the resistance.
We urge all our citizens who believe that these efforts were going to lead to a magical solution to join the resistance and the jihad, including the Palestinian Authority. They should let go of this illusion of a peaceful settlement.
The other Palestinian factions say that this is a new Balfour Declaration, which Bush is offering Israel, reiterating that the Palestinian factions should take a courageous position and begin serious national discussions to include all the factions in order to deal with the next step.
Naturally, the Palestinian Authority should not comply with all the limitations of past agreements. They also need to engage in serious and immediate discussions in order to unite the Palestinian people on a plan they all agree on. Then, today, and not tomorrow, they must announce a Palestinian state with total sovereignty of the 1967 territories, including Jerusalem.
The Palestinian Authority now needs to do one thing. They must move in the direction of conducting national discussions immediately and to create a national Palestinian government to include all Palestinian forces and dismiss their past reservations.
The Palestinian public opinion is very similar to that of the Palestinian factions. They denounce President Bush's remarks, saying he does not have the right to decide on the fate of the Palestinians. After Bush gave Sharon these free gifts, analysts believe that the Palestinian Authority should review its policies and set a new working plan to respond to the U.S. support of Israel, taking into account the views of the various Palestinian factions who choose the option of resistance and jihad.
U.S. President George W. Bush has broken with decades of U.S. Middle East policy by saying Israel might keep parts of the Arab land it captured in the 1967 war. He also ruled out the right of Palestinian refugees to return to their homes in Israel. Palestinians angrily rejected the statement and called on the United Nations to denounce it. Bush's announcement followed a meeting yesterday with the Israeli Prime Minister in Washington. Ariel Sharon presented a unilateral plan for an Israeli withdrawal from all the Gaza Strip, along with a smaller pullback in the West Bank. The plan faces a referendum of members of Sharon's Likud party next month, and Sharon's backers hoped Bush's statement would persuade skeptical voters that the disengagement plan is worthwhile.
In an historic U.S. policy shift, President George W. Bush approved Israel's claim to some West Bank settlements and its pullout from the Gaza Strip. During the conference at the White House, Bush characterized Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon's disengagement plan as historic and courageous actions.
Today, the Prime Minister told me of his decision to take such a step. Israel plans to remove certain military installations and all settlements from Gaza, and certain military installations and settlements from the West Bank. These are historic and courageous actions.
Bush also announced what seemed to be a shift in long-held U.S. views towards Israeli settlements.
in light of new realities on the ground, including already existing major Israeli population centers, it is unrealistic to expect that the outcome of final status negotiations will be a full and complete return to the armistice lines of 1949, and all previous efforts to negotiate a two-state solution have reached the same conclusion.
Israel has planted some 120 settlements in the West Bank since it captured the area along with the Gaza Strip in the 1967 Middle East War. Palestinians were furious after Sharon vowed that Israel would hold on to the main West Bank settlements. Fueling their fears, the Gaza pullout was a ruse to annex the West Bank land. What is likely to further inflame Palestinian anger is also Bush's decision on Palestinian refugees' right of return. Bush said it wasn't possible for them to return to what is now Israel and suggested they be resettled in a future Palestinian state. The statement and letters Bush and Sharon exchanged could go a long way towards helping the Israeli leader push his plan to scrap 21 Jewish settlements in the Gaza and 4 in the West Bank through a binding vote in his right Likud wing party next month. Outside the White House, a group of ultra-Orthodox Jews protested Sharon's visit, charging that Judaism rejects Zionism. The Palestinian Prime Minister Ahmed Qareh in his West Bank home rejected Bush's decision, saying he was the first U.S. president to give legitimacy to Jewish settlements on Palestinian land.
We are the Palestinians. We reject that. We cannot accept it. We refuse it. And we are committed only to the international legitimacy, to the international resolution, to the Security Council resolution, to the roadmap.
Other Palestinian officials say any assurances by the United States to Israel will preempt issues under negotiations and be a major deviation from international law.
And this will not produce peace, nor will it produce security for Palestinians and Israelis. I can sit with the president of Mauritius, for that matter, and then decide to give some parts of Texas to the Chinese. This is exactly what's happening today.
Bush's support for the Israeli Prime Minister will go down well with conservative and Jewish voters in the U.S. presidential election, but is likely to further inflame the Arab world and complicate efforts to stabilize Iraq.
Foreign nationals were urged to flee occupied Iraq as anti-occupation fighters stepped up a campaign of capturing foreigners. The Italian government confirmed that one of 4 Italian captives was killed. The latest to be captured were 2 more Japanese nationals, including at least 1 journalist. Russia, meanwhile, began to evacuate its citizens from Iraq.
The capturing campaign by Iraqis battling U.S. occupation forces is pushing many nervous foreigners to flee Baghdad, while those who choose to stay are keeping a low profile. The latest was the declaration of Italian Foreign Minister Franco Frattini, speaking on state television, that Iraqi captors had killed an Italian captive, Fabrizio Catarocci, and were threatening to kill 3 others because of Italy's refusal to withdraw its occupation troops from Iraq. The capturing campaign by Iraqis has added to pressure from some of Italy's opposition groups for the immediate withdrawal of Italy's almost 3,000 troops, but Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi and his government have refused to back down. Meanwhile, Japan's Iraq capturing crisis deepened Thursday, as reports said 2 more Japanese nationals had been captured in Abu Ghraib, west of Baghdad, while the fate of 3 citizens captured a week ago remained unknown.
We received unconfirmed information today that 2 more Japanese had been kidnapped. According to reports, Junpei Yasuda and Nobutaka Watanabe were abducted. At present, we are still trying to confirm the information.
A number of Russian experts left 3 residents in Baghdad on Thursday morning on their way back home. The Moscow decision to evacuate its citizens from Iraq was made after 8 specialists, 3 Russians and 5 Ukrainians, were captured in the suburbs of Baghdad on Monday evening. The captives were released within 24 hours after the captors learned some of them were from Russia, which opposes the U.S.-led occupation of Iraq. Ukraine has sent troops to join the occupation forces. A ministry spokesman said 7 flights would be made on Thursday and Friday from Baghdad and Kuwait, but did not specify whether the departure would be compulsory. Earlier on Wednesday, French President Jacques Chirac strongly condemned the capturing campaign in occupied Iraq and said he was very worried about the situation there. France has strongly urged its citizens to leave Iraq, saying that they could be mistaken for nationals from countries participating in the U.S. occupation.